भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। So we are on verse 36, chapter 3, Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna uvacha atha kena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha अनिच्छन्नापि वर्ष्णेय बलादेव नियोजितः। Arjuna uvacha, Arjuna said, atha, then, kena, by what, prayuktaha, impelled, ayam, one, papam, since, charati, does, purushaha, a man, anichan, without desiring, api, although, varshneya, O descendant of Vrishni, balat, by force, eva, as if, niyojitaha, engaged. Translation. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? So here we see that Arjuna is actually representing our helpless condition that we all go through. We all have these experiences in our life, that we always find this kind of contradiction in our mind. On one hand, we are always trying to remain peaceful, and on the other hand, some power, some unknown power, forcibly drag us in wrong direction, and we commit sins and ultimately end up with loss of peace. So we the Jivatma is originally spiritual, pure and naturally free from all material contaminations. And we are not subject to scenes of the material world as the Atma. But when this Jivatma comes in contact with the material nature, it performs sinful actions. And that is also even against the will of the true nature of the soul. So we need to find the internal enemies lying within us and which spoil us in every possible way. So it is very important to find it out first, and that is why Arjuna is asking this question, and now Bhagavan will answer in the next verse. Verse 37. Shri Bhagavanuvacha Kama esha krodha esha rajo guna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidhenamiha vairinam. Shri Bhagavanuvacha, the personality of Godhead said, Kamaha, lust, eshaha, this, krodhaha, wrath, eshaha, this, rajah guna, the mode of passion, samudbhavaha, born of, maha ashanaha, all devouring, mahapapma, greatly sinful, vidhi, no, enam, this, iha, in this material world, vairinam, greatest enemy. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world." So here Bhagavan is pointing out the enemies. As we see, he is saying kama esha, krodha esha. So this is lust, this is wrath or anger. So identify them, O Arjuna. These are your enemies. And rajoguna samudbhava, they are born of the mode of passion. Maha ashanaha maha papma, that is all devouring and all sinful. So here Bhagavan is not only pointing out the enemies, but also stating their dangerous nature. Why we have to be very careful of these enemies within our heart. So if we can remember in the last chapter, that is chapter 2, verse number 62 and 63, if we have our books in front of us, we can see that these two verses, dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangaste shupajayate sangat sanjayate kamah kamat krodho bhijayate krodhat bhavati sammoha smriti vibhramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. So there Bhagavan gave a complete step by step falling of the of even a wise man. Even a person, a man of knowledge can fall down in such a way. So everybody, sensible or insensible, though a sensible person only can do it. So we have to be very alert about this enemy, because in those two verses, as Bhagavan said, that when we contemplate on the objects of the senses, then the desire comes in our mind. Attachment, through attachment. So contemplation, then attachment, then this lust, kama, extreme desire comes up in our mind, which if not fulfilled, converted to krodha, that is anger. And this anger is the cause of delusion. And from delusion, there is bewilderment of memory. So if memory is bewildered, then the buddhi, that is intelligence, is also lost. And if intelligence is lost, then everything is lost. A person is sure to go in vain. So those were those two verses, 62 and 63. So we see that our prime enemy is lust, that is kama, and it compels us in wrong direction. So we should not be controlled by them, but we should take the upper hand. See, there is another option here that is also given in this purport, that is how we can spiritualize our these natural tendencies of kama and krodha. Kama, we can desire to satisfy the Supreme Lord in every possible way. So if this is our kama, then it is spiritualized. And krodha, for example, we see that Hanuman, who burnt the entire golden Lanka to express his krodha, that is anger. And he is respected as the most exalted devotee of Lord Ramachandra. And then as Bhagavan was trying to convince Arjuna, and he induced Arjuna to place all his anger in the enemies in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that is the Dharma Yuddha, to satisfy the Lord. So there also we see how to satisfy the Lord, they are spiritualizing the anger, the krodha. So we can also employ these qualities for our spiritual advancement in the similar manner when and as required. So then Bhagavan says in verse number 38, how this last covers the pure consciousness. It is stated in the next verse, verse 38. धूमेन व्रियते बह्निर्यथा दर्शो मलेन च यथोल्बेन वृतो गर्भस्तथा तेनेदमावृतम्. Dhumena, by smoke, avriyate is covered, bahnihi, fire, yatha, just as, adarshaha, mirror, malena, by dust, cha, also, yatha, just as, ulbena, by the womb, avritaha is covered, garbhaha, embryo, tatha, so, tena, by that last, idam, this, avritam is covered. Translation. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this last. So we see there are three examples through which Bhagavan is trying to explain this. How kama or lust covers the pure consciousness of the soul. The first example is dhumena avriyate bahni, that is fire covered by smoke. So when fire is covered by smoke, we see that still a little spark of the fire is visible. So which can be compared with the little exhibition of divine consciousness. And the second example, that is adarshaha malena, mirror by dust. So there also we can see there is a chance of exhibition of divine consciousness after certain cleaning service. Like the purification of mind. After the purification of the mind by various spiritual practices, it is possible. And in the third example that we see, ulbena avrita garbhaha, that is embryo by the womb. So it is the most helpless condition of the soul. We can understand how pitiful and how horrifying the condition of a human body or human soul is within the mother's womb. So that is the most helpless condition. So there is very little possibility to express the divine consciousness. It is almost unconscious stage, we can say. So these are the three levels how kama covers pure consciousness. And in the next verse, Bhagavan is saying, explaining it further. Avritam jnanametena jnanino nityavairina kamarupena kaunteya dushpurena nalena cha. Avritam, covered, jnanam, pure consciousness, etena, by this, jnaninaha, of the knower, nityavairina, by the eternal enemy, kamarupena, in the form of lust, kaunteya, O son of Kunti, dushpurena, never to be satisfied, analena, by the fire, cha, also. Translation. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So here in this verse, there is an interesting word here Bhagavan has used. Avritam jnanam, that is covered pure consciousness, jnanina. Why jnanina? Why of the knower? Is it only applicable for the jnanis, that is for the knower? Is it not applicable for the ignorant? It is applicable for all. So why jnanina? Jnanina means of the knowers. Do you want to tell? Why? Yes, please. Why the knower? Why Bhagavan is here mentioning that jnanina nitya vairina? So this last is the enemy of the knowers. Why the knowers? Because the ignorant has no question. So he does not understand that lust is my enemy. So they are very satisfied, and they are actually, most of them are victim of lust. They are running after to fulfill their lust. So that is why Bhagavan is specifically using this word. And Nitya Vairina, it's not for a certain period of time, eternal enemy. And due to this only we are coming again and again and again and again in this world to fulfill this lust. And Dushpurena, it can never be satiated by sense enjoyment and burn like fire. Analenacha, like fire, anala. So we see it is ultimately the symbol of ignorance, which originates from the mode of passion and covers the pure consciousness of the Jivatma. So the next verse, Bhagavan is giving some more data in this connection to find it out. Indriyani manobuddhirasyaadhisthanamuchyate etirvimohayatyesha jnanamavritya dehinam. Indriyani, the senses, manaha, the mind, buddhihi, the intelligence, asya, of this lust, adhishthanam, seating place, uchyate, is called, etaihi, by all these, vimohayati, bewilders, eshaha, this lust, jnanam, knowledge, avritya, covering, dehinam, of the embodied. Translation: the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the seating places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So we see, to find the enemies, we need to know the possible places where they can stay and their strategic policies also. Strategic policies to fight. So Bhagavan is helping us to identify not only the enemies, the nature of the enemies, and now the places where they can stay. So Bhagavan is saying, Indriyani manaha buddhihi. So these are the shelters of the lust. The sense organs, the mind, and the intelligence. So they welcome lust warmly to sit comfortably as long as they want. Please come and sit. So we see vimohayati dehinam, they completely delude the embodied soul by covering the knowledge. Avritya jnanam. So we see here senses, mind and intelligence, they perform different jobs. The senses are the collector. They collect the things. Mind is the storehouse and intelligence is the controller. Now, as the mind is the storehouse and it stores all the impressions of our previous experiences. Now, when the senses come in contact with the objects of the senses, they collect them and send it to the mind. And the mind immediately gets agitated because it already has all the impressions within it. So it can relate very well and immediately becomes agitated. Now we see that if the intelligence is independent or transparent, then the danger level is low. Because the controller is strong. And if this controller, that is intelligence, is influenced by the mind, then it loses all control and allows itself to be controlled by the subordinate mind and senses. So then what happens? Then this lusty intelligence, it influences even the soul, and the soul then begins to think that that is a false ego is developed. And then it identifies itself with the subtle body and the gross body. And in this state, the person can perform any kind of sinful activity. So this is our situation. So then Bhagavan is also giving the weapon, how to fight with it, how to fight. Tasmat tvamindriyanyadau niyamya bharatarushabha papmanam prajahihenam jnana vijnana nashanam. Tasmat, therefore, tvam, you, indriyani, senses, adau, in the beginning, niyamya, by regulating, bharatarushabha, O chief amongst the descendants of Bharata, papmanam, the great symbol of sin, prajahi, curb, he, certainly, enam, this, jnana, of knowledge, vijnana, and scientific knowledge of the pure soul, nashanam, the destroyer. Translation. Therefore, O Arjuna, based of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. So, okay. So Bhagavan is saying that subdue this enemy in the very beginning. How? By regulating the senses. Because this lust destroys the urge for self-realization, both jnana and vijnana. Jnana means what you are not, that is jnana. And vijnana means what you are, the second step of understanding the self. You are not this gross body or this subtle body, you are the Atma. And the second is you are the eternal servitor of the Lord. So in these two steps, jnana and vijnana. So what we see that this last is the perverted reflection of love of God, prema, kama and prema. Prema is the original feeling or original emotion or everything original, and kama is just the perverted reflection of prema. So, prema is our natural tendency of all the Jivatma. It is the natural tendency. And we can get it back by regulating the senses, by engaging them in higher test and higher service. That is either indirect or direct devotional service. That is all the actions to please the Lord, to satisfy the Lord, without any sense of proprietorship, as we studied in our previous classes. So we see the medical science also says that if there is any object within 5 hands from our body, then we get affected by them, by those objects. So, so we have to be very careful about the association also. And especially if we want the advancement in our spiritual life, we have to be very careful in this regard. And in the last 2 verses, Bhagavan is giving the, actually from here, from this verse only, he is concluding. The next 2 verses I will chant together and then explain. Indriyani paranyahurindriyebhyah param manah manasastu parabuddhiryo buddhi paratastu saha. Indriyani, senses, parani, superior, ahuhu are said, indriyebhyaha, more than the senses, param, superior, manaha, the mind, manasaha, more than the mind, tu, also, para, superior, buddhihi, intelligence, yaha, who, buddhehe, more than the intelligence, parataha, superior, to, but, saha, he. Translation. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, that is the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Verse 43. Evam buddhi param buddhva samstabhyatmanamatmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Evam, thus, buddhehe, to intelligence, param, superior, buddhva, knowing, samstabhya, by stating, atmanam, the mind, atmana, by deliberate intelligence, jahi, conquer, shatrum, the enemy, mahabaho, O mighty armed one, kama rupam, in the form of lust, durasadam, formidable. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence or Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So in verse 42 we see Bhagavan is giving the hierarchy. That is, in the lower level, lowest level, the objects are senses. Senses are higher, one step higher to them. And then manaha, that is the mind, is higher in the 3rd step. Then buddhi, buddhi is on the 4th stage. And above all these is atma, that is the soul. And of course above that is Paramatma also. So Atma, the association of Atma and Paramatma is always there, but it is our deficiency that we don't understand it. So we have to understand it, this hierarchy first, and then Jahi Shatrum Mahabaho. Jahi Shatrum means conquer this enemy. Conquer this enemy called lust. How to control? Because we see that by intelligence, which is the determining faculty, Nishchayatmika Buddhi, as we know, and it should make the sankalpa vikalpatmika antakarana vrittihi, that is mind, the subordinate. It should make the mind subordinate. The intelligence should always make the mind the subordinate and direct it to the divine consciousness. So intelligence is in between the mind and Atma. So it is only possible for it to direct the mind towards the soul, that is Atma, not the other way. Because by buddhi we understand the true nature and position of the self. And thus we can engage the mind and the senses in the divine service of the Lord, as we just said, either indirect or direct devotional service. So when we take shelter of Paramatma or the Supreme Lord, then actually the last is conquered. So then the Atma is reflected, because the intelligence has the power to understand and to convince the mind also. And Atma is actionless, as we know. Atma has no action. So the action has to be performed, the actual action has to be performed by the intelligence. Everything is in its hand. If intelligence is neutral, if it is actually nishchayatmika buddhi, then it will be able to find the best option. So it will be able to then control the mind, and if the mind is controlled, then obviously the senses will be controlled. So in this way, we can, in the very beginning, control the senses and conquer this enemy, that is lust. And if lust is controlled, then krodha will also be controlled, because krodha originates from lust only. So in this way, we can conquer our prime enemy. Bhagavan is pointing out the enemies, their nature, the places of where they take shelter, and also the way to control them, or to remove them, or to conquer them. Okay, so with this, we have completed chapter 3, that is Karma Yoga. So from next year, we will start chapter 4. Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.